Stellar Sounds, the Ansteorran Interview Podcast. Learn about the populace who make up the kingdom of Ansteorra in the game for the Society for Creative Anachronism. Learn more at ansteorra.org.
Hello, Ansteorra. My name is Dona Drew Drake, and I am the Kingdom's social media officer for the Kingdom. And I'm very excited to be interviewing Don Mateo today. He is a friend of mine from Bjornsburg, which is the San Antonio area. And he has had a really interesting journey in the SCA and has been around for a bit of time now. And I thought it would be really exciting for other people to learn more about his story, and for me, because I haven't had a full interview with him before. And so I'm very much looking forward to this. To start with this question, I want to ask, how did you discover the SCA?
Yeah, so I started in the SCA in the barony of Yardzetler, which is mundanely in Madison, Wisconsin, in Northshield. I had moved there as a late teen, early 20s. I think I was 20 years old when I found it. But it was in about, I want to say it was 1997 that I went to my first practice. I was actually in kind of a sort of a toxic relationship. Things were not going well in my life. And a buddy of mine, a friend of mine there, thought that I could use something to do, something to something to take a bath. So he thought I'd be good at it. So he brought me to my first local practice in Madison. And it's kind of a cool, fun story in retrospect. So in Madison, Wisconsin, they practice at the UW Stock Pavilion, which is this big place where they show cattle. So it's a huge floor. The archers come in and do full range archery, and then armored and rapier fighters come in at the time, and they still do today. And then they take over the practice space after the archers are done, and they just this huge field. And I just remember sitting in the bleachers. There's this big stands, right, where people sit and watch cattle shows. And the two fights that I saw happening from both of those fields, one of them was Duke Con McNeil, who is, I don't know, some of your listeners may have met him or something. He's Bob Charon one day. He's playing the SCA and does a lot of historical armed combat stuff. And the person who he was fighting, who I do not recall. And then on the other side, it was the guy who would eventually be the person that taught me, Jock McKee, and Warder Elijah Cameron of the Black Isle. At the time, just Cam, because it's a long time ago, before any of those awards and things even existed. And so I watched, what I didn't realize at the time was I was watching probably at least 3 and probably 4. I just don't remember who the other heavy fighter is, at the most exceptional fighters on both of those fields at the time. And it was just blew me away. But only one of them approached me and put a sword in my hand, and that was Jack that day. And he was like, "Hey, you want a fence?" And he brought me outside. We did some basic footwork. I had done martial arts for about 10 years in my life before coming up there since I was a kid at Shotoku. And so he put a sword in my hand. And as we're sitting inside afterwards, we're doing some footwork and stuff. He sits next to me. He's like, "Hey, you want to be a lackey?" Just that night. And I was like, "Yeah, what does that mean?" And he explained it, which was pretty cool. So I spent my first year in the SCA as his planche, carrying his stuff and following him around and complimenting him. And it was really great. It was actually just shtick and street theater and a lot of fun. And it helped me get to know the SCA. But that was my first event. I got started in 97 there, and I was Jack's student immediately, and in a very particular way. And that's kind of where I began.
That's amazing. Where that is now the Kingdom of Northshield. And so when did you move to Ansteorra?
So I moved to Ansteorra. I've been thinking about this since you asked the question, because I always get this wrong, but I think it was 2008. I think it was the autumn of 2008. It might have been 1 year prior than that, but I think it was 2008. And so, I moved down here to be with my girlfriend at the time, long distance girlfriend at the time, now wife and mother of our daughter. But at the time, I moved down here because I had met her at Gulf Wars that year prior, when the Green Dragon first went up. So I met her at the Green Dragon. She was behind the bar, and I was singing,
I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, we got married there. We got married at the Dragon.
For some reason, okay, now I'm adding more questions in my brain.
Yep, that's fair. No, yeah. So I was the first musician to play at the Green Dragon live. So when I arrived on site that year, they had just built the Dragon over the course of that year. It had just survived Hurricane Katrina. The actual structure itself had just survived Hurricane Katrina. When I arrived, again, Cameron, my dear friend Cameron, came down to camp and he was like, "Dude, you got to see this place." He drags me down, and where everybody used to hang out at the crossroads, but it was just like two big street lights, right? It was like moths to
Hmm.
lights where people would just stand around and talk, and then from there they'd launch. So they built the tavern there, and I mean, I was blown away to see this big 30-foot, massive
Hmm.
medieval tavern. I sort of poked my head in the window, and there were people there now, dear friends and family of mine. And I was kind of blown away. I'm like, "You guys need a musician?" They're like, "Oh, sure, come play." So I brought my guitar and I played, and they asked me to come that night. And so that night I was up in the loft playing, and a bunch of my friends from Northshield who liked my music that came up and to listen. And my wife was behind the bar. I came downstairs after halfway through my set because I was just very distant from the audience and I wasn't used to that and I wanted to be closer to them. So I came down
Uh-huh.
to play on the floor, and that's when I saw her from across the room behind the bar, and I was like, "Okay, that one." And so I went up and then like had to spend the week like chasing her. So I would go fight all day, and then I would get cleaned up, and I would go to the tavern, and I would very kindly ask if she was around. And they would tell me she's dancing, and I would wait, have a beer, hang out, and then eventually we finally caught up with each other because she was also chasing me. So she'd come walking by Northshield, so looking for me, but there's a lot of people in the camp, so she wouldn't, it was fun. But we hung out at the Known World Party, and then spent a year. Actually, spent about a year and a half. Like we were long distance and then
Mhm.
like dated other people and stuff like that. But eventually, I came down here and visited for about a month, and then the following autumn I came down to live. So long story
That's
short, I
amazing.
guess.
For those who don't know, Gulf Wars is the war in the Kingdom of Glenaben in Mississippi against Ansteorra, which is Texas and Oklahoma, and Trimaris, which is most of Florida. And the Green Dragon is at the site, and it is like a built tavern. You'll be surprised. This past Gulf Wars was my second Gulf Wars, and I didn't go to the Green Dragon. I didn't go inside. My first
Huh?
no, 2 Gulf Wars. This was my 3rd
Hmm.
one. Both times, my first 2 years, I never went inside the Green Dragon. Like, I would go meet my friends at the Green Dragon, but they would already be outside.
Hmm.
I didn't go inside until this year, and I actually watched you play for the first time, and
Oh,
I really
nice.
enjoyed it, and it is just a wonderful setup. So if you go to Gulf Force at some point, stop by the Green Dragon. If Mateo is playing, definitely go listen to him. And now they have lots of musicians most
Yeah,
nights, and
all week. I
yeah.
actually produce that music every year, so I get those. I reach out to those performers and schedule that stuff.
Hmm. That's
It's kind of my job
I
there.
yeah, I love performers on the SCA, and that story of meeting her. And then you guys got married at the Green Dragon.
Yep, right under Harriet, right under the Green Dragon on the wall. Yeah,
That is
got
really
married there.
cool.
Did our. Yeah, it was fun. It was good.
Yeah, a lot of I've it's always fun hearing the stories of the different couples in the SCA and how they met. So that is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
Being from both Northshield and Ansteorra, what has it been like living in 2 different kingdoms?
Man, so huge transition. And anybody who's been in the SCA and sort of has been like a piece of a kingdom in a very real and intrinsic way, and then moved someplace else has gone, I'm certain, through something similar to me. So I grew up in North Shield, and it was like it's become sort of part of your DNA.
Mhm.
You play with people, you love you make a found family in the SCA. You have these core memories that exist. And then coming here, it wasn't that I didn't know anybody because I've been coming to golf for year by year by year, and fighting against Ansteorra regularly, like the Ansteorran, my peer colleagues, whatever, fellow white scarves at the time from Ansteorra were people that I had known for years and years and years, and they knew me, right? So it wasn't like I was a stranger, but it still felt stranger in strange land, right?
Mhm.
Coming out of a culture that I knew, and then coming into a culture that I knew about, but knowing about a thing is not knowing a thing, right? Like you don't really
Yeah.
get it until you're living there. So at first it was hard, a lot of homesickness, a lot of like longing for, like even at the time we were thinking we would move back within 3 years. That didn't happen. But like like a lot of that, and also like for a long time I retained my North Shield citizenship, so through treaty signed
Mhm.
by several different crowns in a row, until that finally faded, and I was like, no, I think it's time to like shift over. So what was it like? It was interesting. I was immediately welcomed by Ansteorra. I remember coming the first event I came just to visit when I visited Sarah
Hmm.
the first time. It was Tournament of the Roses here ages and ages ago, and they invited me to the White Scarf Circle that they had there, and there was like 70 people at it. It was insane. It was a massive circle. It was actually kind of a contentious circle, and I remember sitting in the room and being like asked my opinion on the point of contention and being like, I literally got off a plane 2 days ago. But they always I always felt super welcome here,
Hmm.
and which was great. But it takes a while for that welcome to um, to manifest as something that feels like home as well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was just a years long transition of identity. So now, like when I finally passed my device after many years in the SCA recently, I finally found the charge that I want, which is which has 2 stars on it, north and south. So it's got two 8-point
Oh,
mullets on it that I based on both of those places.
that's incredible. I really like that. I'll have to go look it up. That sounds great.
Don't
Um,
ask me to blazon it because I'll embarrass myself because I don't do blazoning well.
the Kingdom of the Outlands did a social media post where they asked people if they like could say it, and I realized I don't know mine at all. Like I don't. I know that I had a Herald friend also from the Outlands help.
Mhm.
Andreas is the one who helped submit my
Me too.
heraldry. Yeah. And so like he submitted mine, and uh I sent him a photo of a friend made for me, and he's like, "Oh great, I'll do this." And I was like, "Great." I don't remember what it was.
Mistress Adelaide and Bjornsburg was frustrated with me when I told her that I didn't have a registered device nor had registered my name after more than 20 years in the SCA. And so she put together a packet of documentation that I then subsequently took too long to submit, but Andreas helped the whole process of getting me through it eventually when I kind of was like, okay, I'm doing this. So,
That's amazing. So you talked a little bit about like your time at Gold Force and getting started.
mhm,
And so we know you're a musician and we know you like fighting, but
mhm.
what are some of your special interests in the SCA? Tell me about your time in both fencing and Bardic, and if there's anything we're missing.
Yeah, so my two primary interests in the SCA are swordplay and Bardic, like you said. But I have a also research and there's a lot of crossover in these worlds. So one of my interests is period rapier combat and period fencing. So I really like researching and studying historically accurate technique. That's a thing that was really popular when I was in Northshield in the Middle Kingdom. I brought that with me here. In particular, I looked at the rapier combat of Don Sanchez de Carranza, which is Destreza. The people call it just sort of Destreza, but it's his sort of like his idea of true art, because I think he's a fascinating historical figure. If I'm trying to pattern myself after a historical figure in terms of my persona, that's Carranza. I do my best, but I'm also interested because mundanely I'm a professor of drama at Austin Community College, and I'm a theater professional and playwright. So I'm also interested in the intersection of theater and fencing in the SCA for research.
No?
I have a research paper. Yeah, I presented well, you were at LPT, so
Yes,
at World's Prize Tourney, so
I
for
read it. I
listeners, which
enjoyed
is
it
an
a
event.
lot.
Yeah, that paper that I wrote about talking about sort of criticizing scholarship, modern scholarship about fight choreography in history in Shakespeare's theater was an interesting intersection to me. So I'm interested
Mhm.
in that. But I've been doing music in the SCA since my first event. I stood up and sang at a bardic circle. I sang Queen of Argyll because I knew a cappella. I didn't really play guitar at the time. I
Mhm.
sang in a cappella because it was a suck. Because I had done Ren fairs in high school. I was a Ren fair kid, and the
Mhm.
Minstrels of Mayhem, who were a pretty famous Ren fair band for a long time back in the mid '90s, mid to late '90s, they had a version of Queen of Argyll, which is like an '80s song from Silly Wizard, right? Or Andy Stewart rather. But I loved it. You know, it was like
Mhm.
from my Ren fair, so I sang that. And I've always been a singer. I did musical theater in high school. Like I was a theater kid in high school. And then I like picked the guitar up and started to write my own music pretty quickly when I started in the SCA. Like a lot of people who get into the SCA early, I was like, it was buzzing in my brain all the time. It's that kind of
Yeah.
session. And so I had a lot of music and ideas and stuff like that, stuff that I still play today. So yeah, I think my two primary interests are rapier and Bardic, and I love doing research on the intersection of those things that I do in the SCA and
Mhm.
presenting that and teaching that.
Yeah. And I could be a bit biased, but I do think both your fighting and Bardic are very good. You do them very
Well,
well
thank
in
you.
the SCA.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate I try. You know.
What do you like about fighting? I know you talked about doing a little bit of the historical research
Mhm.
for it, but like if you could describe to either me, I'm also a fighter, but maybe to even
Mhm.
non-fighters, like what keeps you wanting to go to practice? What keeps you wanting to fight?
Yeah, it changes over the years, right? Like,
Mhm.
when you start, it's about one thing, and then over time it kind of shifts. So I've always been into martial arts since I was a little kid, since I was about 10 or 11 years old. I begged my mom to let me do martial arts. So she put me into a Shotokan school that was very small and private in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is where I grew up, which is like in the southeast corner of the state of Wisconsin. And I studied that at that school and a different school all throughout from 10 to I moved until I moved out of the house in Kenosha, which is about 19, 20 years old, just before coming to Madison. So martial arts have always been a thing. I've always loved swords, like I've
Mhm.
always loved uh like stories like the Three Musketeers and swashbuckling stuff and all the stuff that a lot of people who are attracted to the SCA love, like the Lord of the Rings and things of that
Mhm.
nature. It's always, surrounding the swords. The first sword play I learned was Japanese sword play. So I did Iaido and Kenjutsu for a little through that Shotokan school with a rather good instructor. Like the first sword I ever handled was a 400-year-old katana, and I did like drawing and stuff and all that kind of stuff. That's a distant in my rearview mirror now, but that's the
That's
thing that
so
I
cool.
started with. Yeah, it was fun. I remember like drawing my first sword, like doing because we were doing the Iaido, so it's quick draw. And it's a very sharp weapon and a very light wood scabbard. If you don't do it right, you can cut through it, cut your
Mhm.
hand. I remember doing my first draw and being real nervous about it. But I always loved swordplay. And then when I came to, it was really the SCA that got me interested in doing the rapier though. Like I had never like I love swashbuckling moves, but never been like I want to learn how to fence like that. Collegiate fencing never really interested me. Like foil, I always felt like
Mhm.
it was too whippy and too fast, and I could never really tell, you know, what was going on with that. Now I can, but when somebody put a rapier in my hand, right, I was like, oh, this
Mhm.
is this is the business right here. This feels really good. So when I started, it was like I want to get as good at this as I can. Like I want to be a swashbuckler. I want to be as good at this as I can. That was my beginning. And then I had an era where I was very much I want to be as good at this historically accurate as I can because I'm really interested in that stuff.
Mhm.
And then it's nowadays it is in addition to me like wanting not to be old, like fighting to stay young, fighting to prove to myself that I'm not like falling over yet. And I'm not that old.
Mhm.
I turned 50 this year. I will turn 50 in November, but it's starting to like come up on me, and I'm like, no,
Mhm.
I think I want to kick at that looming darkness for as long as I possibly can. But for me also now it's about helping other people find those things. And so
Mhm.
it's also about the people that I teach and the people that I sort of help along their own path in that way. For me, that's about paying what was given to me by the people who taught me forward. The guy who taught me, Jacques McKee, passed away in 2014. He died of cancer at a young age. But that is like a core change in
Yeah.
my life and in my approach to what I'm doing. And so a lot of what I'm doing now is trying to make sure that what I was given by that man has as much value on into the future as it possibly can. So, but I also still like I love it. I love defense. I love the feeling of the back and forth and the give and take. And like I fought Miles. I mean, the whole day Queen's Champion this weekend was great. I had nothing but great fights that were like really fun. In particular, my fight with Miles, which I lost 2 on, was my favorite because we were just like da 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 da. It was like that. It was that feeling of really being in the fray that I think I love the most. So I also love melee quite a bit. I like fighting with my friends once a year instead of against them. It's a good time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
So that's for with music. I mean, I love to sing. I love to
Mhm.
perform. I'm an actor and a director. Like I did like theater and art is my life. But also, I like how music in the SCA, at least I approach my music in the SCA in part to remember people and to
Mhm.
tell their stories here and also things that happen. And I also like capturing history in a way that doesn't disrupt the vibe, but also speaks to a modern audience. So it's like if it's like most of my music is sort of, I would call it like Ren Fair chic, like it would be appropriate there in terms of its like
Mhm.
how it's written and constructed. But I like to remember the SCA, or history in general. So yeah, and I love to perform. I love to sing. I love that the audience loves my work. It's really nice.
That's incredible. Yeah. So like I said, I've enjoyed your music. I think you're a
Mhm.
great fight. I love watching you fight too. Your disengages. Your sword's never where I think it's going to be.
Good. Keep that up.
Uh-huh. And you have been recognized for your efforts and are a white scarf. You are a Master of Defense. You are Iris of Merit for Arts and Sciences, which is our Ansteorra's grant level. And the SEA has a number of different awards and recognitions. And I'm not going to like ask you to choose your favorite award because that's like
Thank you.
choosing your favorite child.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear about one of your favorite moments or memories for when you received an
Sure.
award or recognition.
So when I received it, yeah. So I mean, like most recently would be
Yes.
this past weekend. I can't not say that given how powerful things because it links back to becoming one of the premier white scarves in Northshield. So I was of the three. I was in that first group of three white scarves in Northshield when we became a kingdom, which was a different emotional response. It was actually like one part terror because the people who taught me were in the audience, and I didn't understand why they weren't there. Like Jack was in the
Mhm.
audience, Cameron was in the audience. Like St. Christian, people that I had grown up with, who had been the previous generation to me, weren't up there. It was me, and it was Toshikage, and it was Rodrigo de Montoya, and I didn't like. I was like, I don't know. There's a picture. If you find it, it's like I've got my head down because I'm processing what that is. Right? Huge honor, huge
Yeah.
burden, didn't know how to manage that, right? But a different emotional. This weekend was wild because I've been here for 18 years ish, like give or take,
Mhm.
almost 20 years, which is almost twice as long as I played in its entirety at North, right? But when I came down here, I was immediately welcomed by the order down. Like they never even blinked at my presence. Nobody ever not once said to me, "Yeah, but you're not one of us. You're on the side." Never, never once. But that didn't mean that I ever once took that for granted. So every time I sit in a circle,
Mhm.
every time I talk to the crown, every time I come to the court, every time I take that oath, is all those things I do. I have always known as a privilege offered to me by this kingdom, and I always sort of a little bit secretly harbored hope that somebody might go, "Hey, you know, this could be a thing."
Mhm.
So in court, for your audience, they can see the video of this. I'm not sure if they'll be able to pick out the details sound wise, but you can go watch that master thing. They just made the shift to the order, and so they asked Floki to come in, Count Floki to come in, and they offered him entrance into the white scarf, which I thought was great. It made me smile. Love the man, it was great. And then they were like, and then there's one more. And in my brain, I'm like, Perrin's not here. Who's the only other one in my head in the order of defense who was in a white scarf? I'm like, Perrin's not. I didn't see. Did I miss Perrin today? Right. And as I'm like literally looking around for Perrin, Her Majesty is like, he's been in the kingdom for 15 years. And I'm like, oh, that's me. She's talking about me.
Mhm.
It was powerful for a number of reasons. I have known John since he was young. I've known Maggie since she was young as well when she was in the kingdom here. And I'm very fond of both of them. And to have them in particular, obviously it's the Queens, but to have them up on that stage in this moment was really big. John gave me a scarf from Alessandro, who is a white scarf that lived here previous that I greatly admire and moved out to Atlantia. He
Mhm.
sent that back, which was very, very moving. Of course, the Queen gave me her scarf that she had made, that she had embroidered Soldier Scholar Courtier into, which is the sort of the triumvirate of ideals for the Lord of the White Scarf.
Mhm.
And then, which was, of course, incredibly moving. What I did not expect, and what hit me the hardest, is this full circle moment that happened when Michelle, and when Her Excellency, am I
Yes.
crazy? Is
Countess.
that
Yes.
correct? I couldn't remember if she was a duchess or not off the top of my head. But as a Lion of Ansteorra, freely
Mhm.
entered court under her right to do so under that award, and I was like, what did I do?
Usually when
I'm
a lion enters court, something may be
like,
wrong.
No. So I turned around and I noticed that in her hand, she had a very particular white scarf that I recognized immediately, because that is the scarf that at the first coronation of Northshield, they pinned to my first Rose's arm. It was the Queen Bradai's arm. It was that scarf, which had come back to Michelle when Northshield closed their order after the creation of the Order of Defense. And
Mhm.
so to have that in my hand as one of the premiers of that order up there, is just like this. It was just this incredible. I mean, I was a wreck. It was this
Yeah.
incredible moment. I'll never ever forget it. Um, but if it's any award I've ever seen given, I'm going to say it's when I was lucky enough to see my first cadet through the circle and become White Scarf themselves, which is when Christiana Eber's daughter became a witness. That is
Mhm.
the moment that I was very, very proud of.
That's
So
incredible.
yeah.
About that uh change, it has been something that has been discussed on social media for us and by different members, the populace, and it was
Mhm.
discussed at the event itself. And as a member of an Order of the White Scarf that closed, and now as a member of the Order of the White Scarf of Ansteorra that it is still open, but it is now changed. What does like this change mean to you? And how does this I it's one of those questions of like, how does this make you feel? Like one of those it is
Yeah.
you were there and it's a historic moment for our kingdom. And so I wanted to see, because you're part of now two orders of the White Scarf, one that's closed, how does this make you feel?
Man, it's complicated, right? It's good.
Uh,
I just out on the outset, I support the change that was made this past weekend. But for me, at least from I only speak from my perspective, right?
Absolutely.
From my perspective, it's a little bit more, I don't know, grounded in the whole process, because I was part of the APEC committee, the Additional Peerage Exploratory Committee. So
Mhm.
I was a part of a committee that helped uh, to debate and design and ultimately submit what now is the Order of Defense. Right. And I had done that as living here in this kingdom. I was appointed to do that. Myself and Robin were appointed to be the two representatives from this kingdom to go do that. Robin McGilwell, and then uh, but I had brought with me, both being a bronze ring of the Middle Kingdom and a White Scarf Shield, and coming down here to do that stuff to that table. That process was a long and challenging process, and
Mhm.
I fought very, very hard to make this peerage happen. Right, as did everybody else, involved in that process. I'm not saying that I was the only
Yeah.
one, because not even a little bit. Right. So after that process happened, one of the things that we knew was that there was going to be consternation in kingdoms that had held their prospective scarved orders, whether it's white scarf or beyond, because there were other orders out there besides that, to a peerage standard in terms of considering candidates. When I was the first week that I was a white scarf of North Shield, we got a letter from that said, we expect you to use the same standards that we use to determine whether or not somebody's worthy of knighthood, to determine whether or not somebody should be. So they spelled it out clear. But not every kingdom's like that. Like, everyone's a little bit different. There were 13 signatory kingdoms to the White Scarf Treaty at the time. And so that
Mhm.
left, I want to say, 6 or 7 kingdoms that were not. I'm trying to remember how many there were at the time, because it's changed since his call jumped up.
Yeah.
But um, there was a lot of weight on my shoulder, on my heart, not my shoulders, on my heart. The weight on the shoulders is borne by a lot of people, but on my heart, because I know, for me, what it was like to dream of being a white scarf in a situation when I couldn't, because I was in the Middle Kingdom and they didn't sign the treaty. They created the Order of the Bronze Ring. And
Mhm.
so I fought hard in North Shield when we were becoming a kingdom for there to be a white scarf alongside many of my brothers and sisters up there. And so when that happened and that dream happened, and then I had to sort of help launch that as one of the premieres, I know that launching an order really mattered, and trying to find a way to keep people's dreams intact really, really mattered. Right.
Yeah.
Um, when Northshield decided, this is years after I moved away, to close their order, was heartbroken. That's just the truth of it. It was heartbreaking
Yeah.
to me. I couldn't. It was no longer the kingdom that I lived in. It was not
Mhm.
the order that I was helping to lead anymore. And the crown decided. I assume, in conjunction. I actually don't know what the process was, because I intentionally did not set myself into it. But with collaboration and conversation with that order, that's what they chose to do. But it was heartbreaking. And it was
Yeah.
heartbreaking for me selfishly, in part because I still had two cadets that lived in North Shield, Deirdre Wickville and Ulrich Creer. Ulrich doesn't really play as much anymore. He became very busy as mundane work. But Deirdre absolutely held that drape. She's still wearing a red scarf.
Mhm.
And I knew that also that meant that in that kingdom, Jock's lineage couldn't continue as a White Scarf, and he
Yeah.
had passed away before the Order of Defense was passed, before it became a thing. So, like for me, the notion of lineage meant that it was cut off. So that was really hard. I pitched a version of what happened this past weekend a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. Once sort of early on in this process here when we started the order of defense and then things were kind of like wibbly wobbly. And
Mhm.
then also up north, I did pitch that before they closed the order as a possible alternative. Not exactly this situation, but something similar. So I believe very strongly that dreams really, really matter in the essay. It's kind of what we do,
Mhm.
and that protecting them and preserving them is important. And I can't think of a bigger artery in the heart of this kingdom than the Order of the White Scarf. And so it's real important to me that it's sustain and be alive as a possibility for people as a North Star to shoot for. And I think that this change preserves it in that way. I have never really been concerned with the official precedence of the order in terms of like its place in the chart, right? That's
Mhm.
never been a thing. I think my good friend and often sparring opponent, intellectual and political sparring opponent, Robert Kilwell, is right when he says that the quality of any given order is more about the people or is about the people and it's not actually about the precedence, right? But I also know that that's not everybody sees it that way, and that just because they don't see it the way I see it doesn't mean that they think their idea or their outlook is invalid, right? And so, like, it's good that, in my opinion, that it's gonna this is murder, but I like the cat. Um, but I think it's good. I think it's really good that we have an opportunity to do that, and it felt to have now gone through it personally.
Mhm.
I mean, I've done this for the better part of 30 years. I have two, three terminal level rapier awards across three different kingdoms. And it was an indescribably good feeling to be able to achieve that dream too.
Mhm.
And so what I believe will happen in the future is that we're going to go through a period of adjustment. And then I think after that, people will have an opportunity to have a really magical moment that retains and sustains this institution on into the future. So I'm grateful that the change was made. I'm also hip to the consternation that it causes
Mhm.
and the worry or the fear that people uh, have expressed. Right? Like I get it, and it's understandable. I think, and I hope that over time they will come around to realize that path actually hasn't changed. That if you compare the number of white scarves made after the Order of Defense was created, it's about the same as the number of knights made in the kingdom after the Order of Defense was created in that same 10-year block of time.
Mhm.
And that having sat in those circles all along, I know that our discussions have never really like sold an idea that there was somehow now um, a thing that was like easier to do, right?
Mhm.
Like we still have the same conversations in the Order of the White Scarf that we've had here and that I've had in every other terminal order that I've been part. So
Yeah.
I hope the folks that are worried about it, I appreciate that, and I hope that they, I don't want to try to invalidate those feelings. Of course not.
Means they
But I
care.
I think yeah, absolutely. It means everybody's like they dream, right? And
Yeah.
if they're afraid that their dream is gone, then it makes perfect sense that
Mhm.
they're gonna have some things that they want to express. And like any major change, there's no perfect way to go about implementing it, and so frustrations about that might abound. But I do believe that over time it will prove itself a wise decision,
Yeah.
and I'm
Thank you for those
very
words.
grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Moving on to the other aspect of that, being a master of defense, you are a peer.
yeah.
After the creation, it is now the highest level. It is aligned with the Order of the Chivalry, Laurel, Pelican, and now newest Order of the Mark.
Mark.
And so, what does it mean to you to be a peer in the SCA?
Good question. When I started in the SCA, there wasn't even a grant of arms level award available to rapier fighters. There was an AOA in the Middle Kingdom called the Order of the Cavendish Knot, and that was it, right? So our like structure, our sort of like leadership structure in the kingdom was largely based on people, right? Usually people who were excellent fighters, but also people who had to like sort of like who showed up and made the thing happen and whatnot. But there was always, especially at the times we're talking mid to late 90s, there was still a lot of anti-rapier aggression happening where I was at. People who didn't respect what we did, people who shoved us to the corner or tried to like exclude us, like move your tournament to a Sunday in the middle of an event, things of that nature, right? Like all the kind of crappy things that we hear legends about now that don't happen nearly as much, still happen sometimes, but don't happen nearly as much. And it always, no matter how many times, even as a white scruff in Northshield, which wasn't a peerage, I would stand up for that community. There was always at least a small population of people who would be like, know your place, you're not a peer, which sucks and is the most unpeer like response in the world, but it happened, right? Also, I knew people, Cameron, Jack, Michael, all these other people that I grew up with who I knew were peers by virtue of the excellence of what they did and their attitude, right? Who they were as people, their peer-like qualities, for lack of a better term. But they couldn't be recognized as that because because their excellence, the thing that they were the best at, was behind the hilt of a rapier. And there was no available recognition for that specifically, for that level of crowds. So I fought real hard to make that be a thing, to try to make that be a thing. Contributed to whatever degree I did to that process. And then having been named the first one that was voted on here, so they made their first 3 premieres, and I was the first name that they voted on. It was a real honor. I actually, again, had my head down because Robert's in the audience and should have been before me, and other people in the audience. It means a lot to be able to know that the impact of this change means that those stories are becoming more and more distant in the rearview mirror to the point now where they're almost gone. I don't know if there may be one more generation of fighters and it just will never happen again, especially now with Donovan and her name's just escaping me at the moment. I'm so sorry. King and Queen of the East recently for regular combat, which is a change that I never thought I'd see in my years in the CA. For me personally, though, it means I have an obligation to do my job. To fulfill my duty. Job is the wrong word because people get paid for jobs. This is voluntary. And so I think to fulfill my duty, I think it's important for me when I'm at events to be the kind of person people look up to and to be worthy of this thing that I've been asked to do. I think sometimes it means I have the obligation to put out fires and to like deal with problems. And it is nice to know. It feels good to be recognized in that way. It does. It feels good to be seen in that way. I get to wear cool stuff, collars and stuff. It can suck, though. Not gonna lie, it's not all roses at all. It's it can be rough. People look to you to have already solved a problem that you are only one person and can't yourself solve. Anything that a collective of people does within a circle that talks inward to each other is a thing that you will be held responsible for, even if you know what I mean. Like there's a lot of aspects to it that are really difficult. But yeah, so I think it means that I have an obligation to think before I act and speak, and to continue to provide the game with a touchstone of how it ought to be. I don't know. It feels arrogant to say.
Yeah. Well, I know the duties can be a lot. As someone who's striving on the path for peerage, it can be a lot. And you are definitely one of those who I've seen who during this change of talking to some people who are looking at the path and they're like, who are some masters of defense and mods I can look at? And your name is one that keeps popping because I believe you are doing the duties and I've enjoyed getting to know you and I hope more people get to know you now. So I have 2 last questions. You talked a little bit earlier about like the paper you're writing and the cross of mundane and SCA. And this question's similar on the basis of I want to know the best piece of advice that you've gotten in the SCA, either from someone in the SCA or it's a lesson you've learned being in this game that you can apply even to your mundane world.
So best piece of advice. Who taught me on offense had a lot of smart things to say. He was a really smart, wise guy. And a wise guy. And he said to me once, he's like, all the things, all these things, all these awards and honors, all the stuff that you get, all these things that hang on you is like, that's just something you got to wash on Sunday. It's like, at the end of the day, the person that you are is determined by the things that you do and the way that you treat people that you're around. And I think that's to me, that keeps my head in the game, both mundanely and SCA, where, and I, in the mundane world, it can be harder because it's a world that doesn't often reward being nice or kind or generous or
Yeah.
honest or honorable. But I find that anytime in the mundane world I am tempted to deviate from that, I don't feel like myself, and it doesn't
Mhm.
actually do what I want it to do. So I think that's probably the piece of advice that I got from him. And then the practice of that in the SCA of making right choices as best you can and as often as you can, I think
Mhm.
really does make for a better life for a person.
That's great. Thank you. And for our
Mhm.
last question, if someone was listening and thinking about joining the SCA, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to like go to their local practice and check it out. Like show up, maybe get a hold of the local shadow lane if there's a local shadow lane in that group, so they can kind of help guide you to where you might want to go. If you're interested in fighting of any kind, we always have learner gear. So I guess my answer is like go and keep an open mind, poke around, see what you want to do, see if it's your vibe. And then yeah, jump into something with your feet first and enjoy it, because I think that's the coolest thing. Like you can go do HEMA if you want a fence, right? But you're
Mhm.
probably going to pay money and you're going to have to provide your own equipment right away. So like our world it has a lot of loaner gear and available equipment and available stuff. And that's
Mm.
true whether you want to do like calligraphy or you want to do like arts and sciences, you want to do music, like people are generous with their time and their stuff to get people involved. So yeah, that would be if you're curious, drop by your local PIP, talk to your local seneschal. Their stuff, their link will be on that local group's webpage. You can talk
Mhm.
to them and email them, and they will help guide you where you want to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Don Mateo.
Thanks for listening to Stellar Sounds, the Ansteorra interview podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and come back to learn more about the many members that make our kingdom so stellar. To learn more about the Society for Creative Anachronism, go to sca.org. And if you're in Texas or Oklahoma, check out ansteorra.org.